Hi, everyone. I'm Bruce Bryan. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Hive9, and I'll be one of your hosts for today's webinar. With me is Laura Patterson, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Patterson, President of Vision Edge Marketing, and I am thrilled to be doing this program with Bruce. I'm really excited, and thank you, Hive9, for having me.
Thanks, Laura. You're very welcome, and looking forward to our discussion today, where we're going to be talking about some of the common problems that many marketing leaders are facing, some specific areas around content strategy, ROI measurement, and segmentation. And what we're going to look at is kind of a unique perspective on some of these issues, because we want to look at how they might be resolved by first moving back and looking at deficiencies in your planning process that could be contributing factors to the specific issues that we're going to talk about. If you're struggling to survive in a constantly dynamic and changing market environment, by focusing on one or more of the individual components of your marketing plans, we want you to take a step back and look instead at the plans themselves, and you might find it easier to resolve some of your other pain points. When we think about the image on the screen right now, it can sometimes seem a little bit daunting, or for some of you, a little bit old school. It's the back of an AV receiver that you might have in your home entertainment system or your home theater. From your speaker to your subwoofer, your HDMI, your Bluetooth connections, there's a lot going on here. But the receiver becomes that operational backbone. It's how everything connects together. It all connects through this particular device. Without it, all of your connections would simply become a mess of cables. And what we think about is translating that to our marketing backbone. So we see our lead generation, our CRM, our budget tracking, our content creation, demand gen, ROI measurement, and more. Um, so you've got all these moving parts that have to come together, and this list could go on and on. But depending on your specific marketing responsibilities and the complexity of your organization, this could get a little bit crazy. So what component is the backbone of your marketing performance management? It's planning. Look at your marketing plans themselves rather than the offshoots of your plans in specific areas. Are there any gaps or inconsistencies or confusing parts of your plans that might be affecting the metaphorical cables that plug into them? In the same way, a malfunctioning AV receiver might affect your sound or video quality, it's your malfunctioning plans that might actually be hindering your marketing performance. I'm going to flip it over to Laura at this point and see what she thinks about this concept.
Bruce, I love the notion of the AC receiver. It's a really good way to illustrate the ideas that planning and accountability are inextricably linked. And I'm glad we're doing this program together because I'm bringing those two ideas of planning and performance management into the same conversation. They're personally favorite topics of mine, but they go together. Dwight D. Eisenhower, I imagine some of our listeners might not know who that is. Again, kind of dating ourselves, but I just couldn't help it because I really love this quote by Eisenhower, which says, "Plans are nothing, planning is everything." And the primary takeaway I have from this quote is that without planning, a plan becomes merely a list of action items. And as someone who has seen a lot, like thousands of plans over the last couple of decades, I can attest to the fact that a lot of plans are just a list of things that people want to do. And I want to talk about how we change that. So I want to start with process. Process is something that all businesses and its functions need to operate. All businesses run on processes, and marketing is no exception. And planning takes a documented process. I'm kind of curious how many of the folks that are with us today have a documented planning process. We find that that's a process that is map that is often missing in the library for many organizations, and we encourage everyone to have one. It's important to have a couple of really critical components in the process associated with planning, especially components that include clarity around key inputs to the plan, like customer insights, market trends, competitive intelligence, and your organization's strategic initiatives, which leads us to this next one, which is outcomes. Outcomes are what we as organizations use to declare success. They constitute what success is for our company. They need to be quantifiable and they need to be customer centric in order for marketing to craft a plan that is aligned to the business and will move the needle. It's these outcomes that provide the foundation for the objectives that in the marketing plan. And again, sometimes a huge disconnect between outcomes and objectives. I want to remind all of us in marketing that we don't market to buckets of revenue. We market to customer and market segments, which we'll talk a little bit more about shortly. But marketing objectives need to be measurable and reflect how marketing is going to impact and contribute to the outcomes. And this then leads us to strategy. Strategy is how we're going to get the outcomes and objectives achieved. I know a lot of people, when I see plans, have things like PR, content, social as their strategy. Folks, these are not strategies. These are tactics. We really don't have time to go into strategy today, and I think it would be a great topic down the road for maybe worthy of another conversation. But some examples of marketing strategies might be like for product, it might be bundling, or for customers, it might be ambassadors. So those are some ideas maybe to get you thinking differently about strategy. I'll send it back to you, Bruce.
Thank you, Laura. Before I move on to this next track, I do want to add to what Laura just said, and just maybe not add but highlight just how critical everything she just said is to the foundation of solving some of the problems that we're going to look at today. If you think about what she just said about strategy and about outcomes and about a process to putting this together, that's putting you in a position to not come face to face with some of the problems we're going to discuss in the first place. So really, when we're thinking about getting into the details on this next section, take a step back and think about what Laura just said, because that's foundational. That's what's going to get you on the right track to begin with. Now, three of the common areas that we decided we wanted to just give as examples. These are not the only three. These are not the biggest mistakes people make in planning or anything like that. These are just three really common areas that, in our experience, our customers and our prospects have told us that they struggle with, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to focus on content creation, content strategy, content utilization as one of the things that are kind of a detailed execution problem that people are trying to solve. For the second one is ROI measurement. How do I tell if what I'm doing is working, and how do I prove that to everyone else who's looking and people who want to give us money to work with? We have to be able to make that case. And then finally, segmentation. Thinking about segmentation at time of execution drives me crazy, because when you think about measuring performance, it is the context of that measurement that matters. So did I perform as well as I was hoping to perform is really what we're trying to assess. And if I don't have my segmentation set up in the first place on assessing how we want to perform, what good is it going to do me on the back end if I start thinking about it at that point? That being said, let's start with content creation. A common issue that marketing organizations face is obviously delivering the right content at the right time to the right audience. Um, According to Gartner, marketing teams are spending upwards to 30% of their budgets on content creation, whether that's internally or through agencies. It's still a big chunk of that budget. However, less than 40% of marketers who do content creation have a defined and documented strategy in place that is governing what they're producing. So it's no wonder that we find organization after organization telling us that so much of their content is underutilized, and they feel like they're building things that go on a shelf. This is because of a lack of a defined and documented strategy, and we're seeing that in a lot of places. So let's get specific. Let's say you're looking to consolidate your content from all your brands across the US and promote that content to certain clients in specific geographies. If your plans are built by teams in spreadsheets, PowerPoint, Google Docs, sticky notes, and so forth, a lack of structure is going to probably impact your ability to aggregate this content and know what to deliver and when to deliver it. After all, spreadsheets were developed to organize and manipulate numbers. They weren't built to juggle marketing campaigns divided by geography and other complex segmentation. One way to think about fixing this problem is to establish a structure through which marketers can get all of their teams on the same page before they even begin to create and to deliver content. One of the things you should think about establishing is a consistent planning hierarchy across your marketing organization. Lay out exactly what constitutes your hierarchy and how each component ties back to an overall strategy. By doing this, you bring the common language to marketing planning across the entire organization, anchor points which marketers can then create content and know it's pointing toward the right strategy. Now, the structure that we're seeing here is broken up into four very significant components that each have a purpose, and it's flexible enough that you can build it into other areas. So the plan itself is typically at the highest level, typically tied to a budget owner. In a larger organization, you might have specific geographies or business units that have their own plan, depending on the complexity that you're dealing with. We come down a level, and that campaign layer, whatever you call this layer, it should be that second tier down should be really about your theme or message. For Hive9, it's Hive9 helps marketing leaders plan, predict, fund, measure, and improve. And that's kind of a messaging layer for us, and then we would build the programs off of that. Now, if you've got, again, a more complex environment, you could add campaign categories and groupings at that level to give you that additional granularity. We get down to the program layer, and this is where you should be thinking about objectives. What am I trying to accomplish within that campaign? Is this about brand awareness? Is it about sales enablement, customer advocacy? Where within that theme our objectives are going to be held? And again, if I need to take, say, my customer advocacy, my onboarding, my growth and retention programs, and lump them together, I could have a customer programs family within that so that I can be better organized. Finally, we get down to your tactics or activities. These are the building blocks. This is what you're actually going to do. And this is where you need to articulate what those are going to be. This might be the within an events program. It might be the actual event itself, but it might also include the pre and post emails and communications around that event, so that we have the complete list of tactics. This is where you're going to hit your third-party expenses. This is where you're going to actually develop and create the assets at this level. Now, for you, that structure, you might need to rename some things and customize it and make it your own. But the point isn't to use the structure that I just laid out. The point is to have a structure and to have that same structure get used across the organization. So if you move resources around, they all know how to talk to each other. And that's really what's going to make this powerful. Having that increased visibility into what's happening because you can see across everything in a common construct, you're going to start to eliminate duplicate content. You're going to start to align with top level targets. It's going to put you, that structure alone is going to put you on the right path. So what's the right content you should be rolling out? To figure this out, make sure you're establishing that campaign hierarchy first and foremost and getting that construct in order so that you know what you need. From here, we're going to now let Laura chime in on how to get your content right. So once you've got that construct which you're going to live in correct, how do you get the content itself right? All right, Laura, go ahead.
Thanks, Bruce. I wanted to say how much I love that little post-it note a few slides back that says a really great plan that was lost or put away. I can't remember exactly the words, but I love that little post-it note because that's often what happens to a good plan is you go through the process and then it ends up on a shelf somewhere. And good plans are living documents. They're the guides, the blueprint that we're using every day to run the business of marketing. And so let's talk a little bit about getting your content right and some of the things that you need to do that. And one of the very first things that we need for our plan and feeding our content is data. Data is the lifeblood for all businesses. And for many companies, data, actually having enough data, really isn't a challenge anymore. A lot of companies are drowning in a sea of data. Rather, the real challenge is deriving insights from the data. Data derived insights, they're pretty essential for everything we do in our business and in marketing, whether it's a strategic or tactical decision, a decision around customers or markets, products, and people. If we want to be able to make good decisions, we need good data and the associated insights, because that's what we use. That's the ingredients, the insights from the data to define our strategy, create segments, whether that's a market-oriented segment such as an industry, or a segment like, for example, based on a technology like businesses using a particular ERP platform, or customer segments that are based on needs or personas. You've got to have data to do that. And that's really critical to segmentation, because it takes the insights from the data to use the segments to complete the customer journey map, which is how we understand how customers move through their process, how they organize their steps from investigating a solution to ultimately making a purchasing decision and becoming a member, long-term member of a customer community for your organization. And so we need the data to make the map and understand what customers will need from us, especially in terms of content at each stage. So we understand what is the right content in the right channel in which stage, so that they can move forward in their journey. And it also takes really good data to build out a message map. And we're going to need this message map because it's vital to the segmentation messages and the customer journey stages, because it is what we use to create our stories and prepare us for competitor moves and prospects objections. So whether it's your strategy, your segmentation, your message map, or your customer journey, they're all built on insights from data that you are necessary to inform your plan and your content decisions.
That was great. I love where you're headed with that, and just a thought that that message map should actually be stored and accessible in that plan as part of that campaign level. I should, if I'm whatever I'm building at a level below that, I should be able to go up to that campaign and see the message map and make sure that I'm aligned to it. Love where you're headed with that. We're going to jump into our second problem now, and that's the ROI measurement problem. So we got a good plan, a good content strategy. How do I figure out what it's producing? And I want to first define this problem. You know, achieving ROI is ultimately the goal for any marketing organization. We want to be able to justify the confidence in the investment that we're allowed to make. Knowing how to measure it, however, can be also one of marketing's ultimate struggles. Can be difficult. The CMO Council recently, released a C-suite scorecard surveying 120 senior management executives from companies of all sizes and industries. And what that showed was that business leaders are looking to close several gaps in their marketing organizations. Two of the primary ones that they found were the need for more skills, proficiency, and capability involved around measuring and proving ROI. Specifically, they were looking for more adaptive, informed decision making based on good data and the ability to make a business case for marketing spend. So when I think about what Laura just said, this study feeds right into that. Informed decision making based on good data. And that feeds right back into my content strategy. Now, how do we solve this problem? Well, the next step is to connect your plans to a revenue model. So what we mean by this is that we've got to look up patching up this common hole in the planning process, and that is that most plans today do not connect to or use a revenue model to determine the expected impact of the plan. So I can't, in Laura's world, when we start talking about outcomes and things like that in her planning process, if I don't know what the outcome was supposed to be, it's very difficult to measure whether or not my relative performance was where I want it to be. So we want to be looking at, understanding if our plans can deliver on our goals. and using a revenue model can do that. Building off the rules in our planning hierarchy, our revenue model can define the rules for calculating the expected performance of the tactics and rolling them up into the programs and campaigns and plans. As you build out across your marketing plans, you'll start to accumulate costs on the one hand and performance and goals on the other. You can roll your tactics up and see that ROI at any level along that chain. So I can look at campaign ROI, program ROI, tactic ROI. If you really put the rigor into setting up your plans right and then support them with a workable revenue model, you're also going to reduce the redundant efforts, cut down on a lot of errors, improve overall productivity by having everyone working toward the same goals and through a plan where everyone's on the same page. Now, another vital prerequisite to accurate ROI calculations is to take your revenue model a step further by accounting for your waterfall, your demand waterfall conversion rates and velocities. And I know that everyone looks at demand waterfalls differently, whether yours is account-based, whether it goes all the way to revenue or it just goes to pipeline. As Laura's going to talk about, it's about the outcomes that you define that are important to the success of your organization. So understanding that, putting this framework in place and being able to see what's happening and how long it's going to take to happen across your buyer's journey, across the demand that's coming into your organization is going to be critically important. When ROI is measured against the context of your plans, that's when it provides real guidance for how you should be adapting to dynamic market conditions. And with that, I want to toss it over to Laura so she can talk about connecting work to value.
Thank you. And this is probably where I'm most passionate, so I hope that comes through. We've been sprinkling this notion of data all through this conversation, and again, might be something to spend a little more time on and down the road. But while we're talking about data, this is a really good time to talk about measures and accountability. So I just want to remind all of us, I'm sure everyone listening knows this, but one of the things that you and I talk a lot about, Bruce, is how important it is to have clear definition of terms and that common vocabulary. And now you alluded to that before about structure. As long as it's a common vocabulary and everybody understands it, that's pretty critical. And the same applies to performance measurement and management. So not all data are measures, but all measures and metrics and KPIs or key performance indicators, they are data. So for example, SIC and zip codes are data, but they're not measures. Even though we see them sometimes being used, they're really not a measure of any kind. It's just a piece of information. Measures, metrics, and KPIs are terms that are often used interchangeably. I just want to emphasize that they are not the same. A measure is a quantity. And so using our previous example, how many companies are in a particular SIC or zip code is a measure of how many. We really can't connect that back to performance or value in any way, but it is a measure. It is not a metric. A metric is a standard of measurement, and it provides some insight into performance. And there are a lot of metrics out there that people are very familiar with, and we will talk about that in just a second. But first, I want to just, for example, like email open rates. That's a metric. Because we have general agreement, there's been lots of research done by various companies across all kinds of industries on what constitutes a good open rate. So we can see how we're performing against a standard. Open rate, however, is not a KPI. And even though a lot of people will use it as a KPI, it is definitely not a KPI. KPIs are very special metrics, and we don't need a lot of them. And I'm always amazed at how many companies have a plethora of KPIs in a moment. We'll talk about dashboards. Think of KPIs as a health metric. That is something that we can and want to monitor and change and is changeable. That's really important about a KPI, is that it is changeable. So let's use an example what everyone's familiar with, and then we'll apply it to business. Blood pressure is a health metric that is a KPI. We have what we call acceptable operating parameters for blood pressure based on age and gender and a variety of other things. And when it is out of whack, it's a really bad thing because it might lead to a stroke, and nobody would want that, right? So we want to monitor and make sure that we keep it in line. We will take action if it is out of these acceptable operating parameters, especially for any particular length of time. A company KPI that is relevant to marketing might be something like market share. That would be a good example of a good KPI. Now, so we've talked about measures, we've talked about metrics and KPIs, and I've kind of alluded to different kinds of metrics. So I want to talk about the way to categorize or classify metrics. Um, we have a continuum at Vision Edge Marketing that a lot of people have found useful. It's called the metrics continuum. And it's basically a left to right type of way to classify your measures, with left being activity measures. Like, for example, how many events we sponsored or held this year. That would be a measure that is an activity. And again, a lot of people do report on how many things they've done. Um, and we call those activity measures. But moving from there, we would go to the next kind of category, which is output measures and metrics. So for example, the number of registrants for this webinar, or email open rates, or advertising click-through rates, or download counts would all fall into this category of outputs. Right from there to the next one is operational measures and metrics. And these really are insight into efficiency. So we've moved from counting something to an output of something, right? From effort to some type of result of some type of effort to effectiveness or efficiency, excuse me, for operational metrics. And these might be things like leads per sales rep or costs per program or something along those lines. We need to be very careful about these types of metrics and using them and when we use them, because if we're not careful, we end up being a hamster on a wheel with the leadership team saying, how can we tweak those operational metrics and get more for less, right? So those is a good sign when you're getting asking to do more for less, that you're probably in an operational metric. Now, these provide some really good business value, but not much value in terms of impact and contribution to the business. And that's why we need to get one more step at least to the right into outcome-based metrics. In this category, we are just now beginning to provide a measure that demonstrates impact and contribution. And an example of that might be product adoption rate, or referral rate, or trial rate would be examples of outcomes. And then the very last place we're getting on this continuum is what we call leading indicator metrics. For example, share of wallet. We know that if the share of wallet moving is to the right, other things are going to follow, right? So it's a really good example of a leading indicator. If share of wallet's moving to the left, that's probably a bad sign as well. So your measures, your metrics, and your KPIs, these are the foundation for how we account for our work and how we report on our performance, our value, our impact, and our contribution. It's really important to choose wisely. And to avoid a smorgasbord of numbers, which we often see when we are working with companies on dashboards and scorecards, you need two really important ingredients: performance targets and chains. So I want to talk about performance targets first. Performance targets are our commitments or our promises, the things that we said we're going to deliver in our plan. More leads, more awareness, more of anything. And I cannot tell you how many times, Bruce, we see that in a plan. The word more is not a performance target. Performance targets are very specific, and they are what enable us to declare success and to understand what is and isn't working. So we must have them in the plan, in all levels of the plan. Without agreed upon performance targets, from our activities all the way up to objectives, then success becomes arbitrary. We can declare success and leadership may not necessarily agree. So good plans and good dashboards that report on performance, they connect the work and investments of marketing to business results. That means they need to form a chain. That is a chain from our activities, our tactics, our programs, and objectives right up to the outcomes. And so that's a critical step a lot of companies miss, is taking a look at all those metrics and understanding which ones are actually related to each other and can be used to create those important chains from the top to the bottom and back again.
All right, Laura, I love that. I love the categorization. I do find that very often people that I talk to struggle with understanding the difference between a metric and a KPI, and that really can derail the whole conversation. The other thing that can derail the conversation is getting lost between metrics and segmentation. Uh, and you should be measuring a few things, like you said, and measuring them really well. And then you should be segmenting it as much as possible because that's where the stories are. And that's what we're going to talk about next with our segmentation problem. So even with a great plan in place, you're always going to want to fully understand your segmentation before diving into other areas of marketing performance. You need the segmentation if you want to conduct any kind of meaningful analysis of your results when you start comparing to your plan. What segmentation does is break up your plan to align it to your specific goals and strategies in order to produce a more effective marketing plan. So, if the CEO says we're going to double down on the financial sector, well, I need segmentation around verticals if I want to be able to showcase what we spent and what performance we got out of the financial sector. So that's where segmentation really helps us to align. To describe, the importance of segmentation, Forrester uses an analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, and that's what we're seeing on the screen here. Before you try to put all the pieces together, you might first separate them by commonalities, whether it's their color, their shape, or their size. In the same way, for marketing, it's a lot easier to more effectively target the right people with the right messaging and content when you first separate them by certain characteristics. And that's really what we're talking about with segmentation. According to their research, almost a third of marketers are saying that linking insights to specific segments is a top obstacle to applying measurement and analytics. And I would argue, Laura, that that is because they're not doing it up front at the plan. When you
I
wait
would
until the
agree.
back end, you don't have the data in the right construct, you don't have the plans spread out the right way, so you can't do comparative performance. So how do we do that? We need to enable better segmentation practices and make sure that you're keeping things as simple as possible. You want to absolutely calculate your metrics and understand performance at each level of segmentation, but you don't have to go crazy around this. Some basic segmentation. Think about customer focused segmentation. Think about geography focused segmentation or marketing specific focused segmentation around the types of work that you're doing, the delivery mechanisms, the status, who's doing the work, uh, spliced around your campaign framework. Those all become parts of the segmentation. But ideally, as you pull this together, also recognize that just because you created a segment around country doesn't mean that you need to be thinking about 196 countries or whatever the number is today that we have on the planet. You can you can create segmentation around countries that looks at the top 10 countries that you do business in and then creates another country called other so that you get meaningful segmentation out of this. So it's just something to think about as you go through each of these areas, is that you can segment at a right level of granularity without boiling the ocean in terms of the level of detail that you need to capture. So what does segmentation do for you? Segmentation is what tells the story. That's where the story is in the cohorts. And a cohort is a specific, typically an intersection of multiple segments coming together. They form a cohort, and we want to understand how that cohort behaves. So oftentimes when I talk to organizations and they're looking at performance and they're saying, you know what, we were fairly close to where we needed to be, but I would have liked it to have been a little bit better. When they break it out into segments, they find that, you know what, our messaging to the CFO audience in Europe did not take. Something is missing in that messaging because we're underperforming across the board with that particular audience segment. So by having the segmentation built in, I split my performance apart and I can see we're doing really well in one place and not so well in another. In aggregate, it looked like it was a wash. But when we get into the cohorts, we're going to find opportunities for improvement. And some of them are going to be big opportunities. And that's what segmentation can do for you. Now, Don't panic. Getting your marketing plan structured and in order is critical to your marketing performance success, and therefore it needs to be done before you address some of these other issues. Even if you have the latest and greatest TV and stereo system, your home theater experience won't live up to your expectations if you don't have a receiver and have it up to par and connected to everything. Plan first, then plug everything else into your plan when you're ready, and that'll put you in a much better place. I want to get some final thoughts from Laura.
Bruce, I just want to emphasize how important segmentation is, and everything we do in marketing is to connect with, engage with customers at some particular point on their customer journey. And all of that needs to be in the objectives in a very quantifiable, measurable way in order for us to do the work that we've been talking about around content and connecting our work to business results. One of the things that we like to do at this point in a conversation is let people take a moment to think about what's one idea that they've gotten from this conversation. We always want people to take away at least one actionable idea, something they are going to do better or differently. So we just want to give you a moment to write down one thing you will do as a result of today's discussion. So it's a time to wrap up, and I want to thank everyone for their participation and thank Hive9 once again for including us. And remind everyone that for most members of the C-suite, their number one mandate is to grow. And marketing is the company's growth engine, not demand gen engine, not lead gen engine, not sales enablement engine. Yes, we need to do those things, but the growth engine. Our job is to find, keep, and grow the value of customers, hence the importance of segmentation. This should be the focus of every marketing plan. And we're happy to explore reviewing your plan or helping you create it. We've been doing this for a long time, as Bruce knows, and we've been at it since 1999. And our customers find that we take a very collaborative approach, and we'd love to collaborate with you to be able to help you accelerate profitable customer-centric growth through analytics, strategy, process, and performance measurement and management. Come tap into our expertise so you can foster faster, more confident decisions, organizational alignment, operational excellence, and to build those critical skills for your team. Thanks for taking the time to be on the journey with us today.
Thanks, Laura. And as Laura just alluded to, we want to help you fix this. If any of these problems resonated with you, we'd love to be that partner. This is the only promotional plug of today's event, but you've got our contact information on the screen there. You've got some website resources that you could jump into. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd like to work with you in the future. Thanks for tuning into Hive9 and Vision Edge Marketing's discussion on marketing planning. We appreciate your time.